Today we celebrate the memorial of Blessed Miguel Agustin Pro, and he was, when you read about his life, he was a little bit of a troublemaker growing up, very much into doing all sorts of different things. Some of the trouble that he got into ended up with him being knocked out because of the violence of it, falling out of a tree, or I don't know what. It didn't go into when I was reading about it, but that's the image I got. And when he woke up, immediately he says, "I want some sweetbread." Cocoa is what it was called. He wanted some sweetbread, and his parents are like, "What?" Freaking out because their kid has been unconscious. And so he took that name that became his nickname, was Coco. And as he was later as a priest, in the midst of the persecution of Catholicism, and specifically priests in Mexico in the early 20th century, that was his code name, was Coco. But he would go and do what he needed to do in order to get the sacraments to his people. He would dress as a beggar and go as if he were begging in order to go and bless a marriage or baptize a child. He would do clandestine masses in people's homes or in barns or in other places. He would dress up as a police officer to bring viaticum to those in prison. He would dress as a businessman in order to go into high rent districts. He did what he needed to in order to go, basically like a spy, in order to go and bring Jesus to his people. He was falsely accused of trying to assassinate a leader in the Mexican government, and so without trial he was shot. But the last words he said as he was dying, after forgiving his killers, was "Viva Cristo Rey," basically, "Long live Christ the King." Viva Cristo Rey. A great example for us today of how to continue persevering even in the midst of struggles and turmoils and the things that aren't going our way. Here was a man who continued to seek after the heart of God, who sought God's love, and to bring that love to his people. In the psalm today, we hear, "Lord, this is the people that longs to see your face." Miguel longed to see the face of God, and he knew that the longing of his people was there, and so he would bring Jesus to the people that he could, even in the midst of churches being closed and everything else. Do we long to see the face of God? St. John Paul the Great said that we are to meditate on the face of Christ, on the glorious face of Christ, on the suffering face of Christ. And I encourage you to do this, to take time to meditate on Christ's face. You see, when Christ became a human being 2,000 years ago, when he took on our flesh, he took on a face that we can imagine, because we can't imagine the face of Almighty God as God. But we can imagine a human face. And so we can imagine his face in the Transfiguration. We can imagine his face after the resurrection. We can imagine his face in glory, in his full humanity. We can also imagine his face in the agony in the garden, in the scourging, in the crowning with thorns. We can imagine his face in the dust of the earth as he's fallen underneath the weight of the cross. We can imagine his face on the cross. We can imagine his face in death. And in those times we can then console the face of Christ. We can wipe the blood off of his face, the spit off of his face. We can give him the consolation of our love. And as we spend that time meditating on the face of Christ, we will long more and more to see the face of God. Lord, this is the people that longs to see your face.